This is Aer Dogs, a podcast series on the aviation industry that will take you from the boardroom to the boarding gates. In this episode of Aer Dogs, we sit down with Joe Gilmore, CEO of Knock Airport in Ireland. We discuss the history of Knock Airport, sustainable aviation fuel, and what's next for Knock.
How are you? I'm Dec Ryan. Welcome to the Aer Dogs podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Gilmore, the CEO of West Airport in Knock. Joe, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Dec.
I appreciate you coming down from the West, and we're both lovers of Mayo, so next time maybe we'll do it up in Claremorris or somewhere like that. The first question we ask everybody is, when did you become aerosexual, which i.e. means when did you fall in love with aviation?
I suppose firstly, like, if I could say, I'm delighted to be invited to be on the podcast and feel privileged to be in such esteemed company. I was thinking about that one. When did I become an aerosexual? You know something?
Well, maybe you're not.
Well, I tell you what, it dates back to my father's time.
Yeah.
You may remember there was an airport in Castlebar.
Yeah.
Back in... Yeah. I was looking at built in 1966 for the.
Sorry to interrupt you. Was there an Italian guy involved with that?
Not that I was aware of, but
or who used it?
Definitely used it. It was built by the Ryan brothers, four brothers, and their brother-in-law.
Oh shit!
But not of the Ryans. Okay?
Not of the Traveller Tipperary crew. Okay.
But at the time, they had an ardent interest in all things west of Ireland and connectivity and aviation. Yeah. They built the airport for the pricey sum of £35,000 at the time.
What year?
Right, 1966.
Okay.
Just think about it.
Where are those lads now when we need them?
A 2,000 foot long tarmacadam runway, which was sandwiched between the N60 and the existing railway track.
Yeah.
And they created an airport for aviation enthusiasts. My late dad was one of those.
Okay.
Right? And he was kind of one of these guys that really lived life to the full and was a jack of all trades, and aviation was his passion. Yeah. He flew and got a PPL, private pilot license with them, and on a number of occasions he brought me up as a young kid, right? And he frightened the life out of me, okay? He absolutely frightened the life out of me. He was one of these guys that had no fear we lived, I grew up in a townland called Brickens, just outside of Claremorris, and he would literally come and literally wave to my mum out the window. My mum never got into an aircraft in her life. So I was thinking back, that's where I got my first taste of aviation. Sorry,
what year was that?
That was early 70s, early to mid 70s. Right. I was only a nipper. Yeah. I went on and I went to study in college and so forth. My first job was based at Shannon Airport in the industrial estate, working for a multinational company that I travelled very frequently in. And I ended up spending most of my time in the air, not flying, but travelling globally from... I spent a lot of time in Asia, places in the 80s that people didn't get to. A lot of time in mainland China, flying an aircraft that I took an ardent interest in the type of planes I was flying, because at the time aviation in China and India wasn't that safe. Yeah. So I was trying to avoid old Aleutians or Tupolovs and all these. So I took an interest in aviation from that point of view. And that kind of led my overall interest. And finally I was thinking, I used to love going down to the end of the runway in Shannon, watching the aircraft train. And there was one particular evening, there was a 747, a Concorde, and I think it was a TriStar doing laps of the. So that's where it kind of came from. And I suppose I'm a trained physicist by nature, so the whole science of flight I found fascinating, So,
isn't that great?
So I when I'm bored, I get a cup of coffee and I sit out in our lounge area and I just watch aircraft land and take off. And some of the weather conditions we have down the west can sometimes be.
Young man, you're a true aerosexual. What was your dad's name?
My dad's name was Joe as well.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm just intrigued. How many hours did you get up, or?
At the time. My father, his main business was in cinemas.
Yeah.
We had a mobile cinema that we showed movies all around the west of Ireland.
Amazing.
He also had we had a filling station and a small garage with a small farm. And he was also
real entrepreneur.
He was also an auctioneer as well at weekends, just to make a few quid.
Yeah.
Right. He got up whenever he could.
Yeah.
Time and the cost of it, to be honest with you, dictated it. So I assume he got his 300 hours or whatever it took to do the PPL.
Where I'm getting mixed up here, Joe, is there was a industrialist who was an Italian, who had a factory. I think he certainly lived in Castlebar. Now I'm going to get the name wrong. It sounded like Ferrati. He made
Ferranti.
He made we'll check it out another time. He made gauges for engineering, for temperatures and so on. But there's crazy stories about him in a helicopter and taking the helicopter to go see the dentist in Castlebar and all this kind of stuff.
I would believe it. And I'll just finish on the story at Castlebar Airport. One of my previous jobs was a company called Volex, who were prior to that Cable Products in Castlebar.
Okay.
They were a large telecoms employer, and Cable Products came to Castlebar in the mid 1970s. Yeah. And the way Cable Products, the guys from Boston, the original investors, came with the idea was they flew from Dublin to Castlebar Airport. And they obviously landed Castlebar Airport, but they followed the train line down to avoid the horrific roads into the west of Ireland at the time. Yeah. But speaking to those investors at the time, they were really impressed that they could actually fly from Dublin Airport to the west of Ireland, and they located there, and they set up in an industry that lasted 40 years and employed thousands of people. So great? It shows you the power of aviation.
Yeah, and it also shows you somebody using their noggin in Enterprise Ireland or the IDA and saying like, Jesus, let's not bring them through I'm going to get myself shot here through Roscommon. but I think Joe, not just with my Ryanair DNA, I think you know how much I love the West and Knock and so on. How do you handle, and this is me being genuine, how do you handle people not taking your airport seriously? And it's an issue. Like I saw something written the other day, and it still had the Jim Mitchell quote, which I'm not going to quote, but is that does everybody forget that, or is it an issue for you?
I think if I could take a couple of moments to kind of revisit why the airport was put there in the first place and where it came about from.
Please.
We all know we may not know the story of when Pope John Paul II visited Knock Shrine.
I thought we were going to talk about Virgin Mary now. Anyway.
That's another pod.
Yeah. I just want some evidence that she was there, Joe. But
we don't ask those questions.
Okay, yeah. My mom, if she was alive now, would be throwing the crucifix at me. But anyway,
the story goes that the Monday morning after Pope John Paul II visited Knock Shrine in 1979, Monsignor James Horton got together a group of like-minded people from around the West, and particularly Castlebar, and this is where the Ryan connection comes in. One particular individual of the brothers, Jim Ryan, who was the brains behind the development of the airport in terms of the engineering side, he brought him in terms of how would he design and build an airport. And obviously people thought he was, way off the mark in terms of his thinking. But he brought together a group of like-minded business people, cajoled government of the day, and secured 9 million old pounds in funding over a 5-year period.
Would you give me the year?
81 to 85, the airport was built.
That's a lot of money.
So he secured 9 million pounds of government funding, and he raised a further 5 million in funding.
Phenomenal.
Through a jumble raffle, which there was a 50,000 prize fund offered, and every house in the country got got the option to buy a raffle ticket for £20.
Yeah.
And I think he raised half the funding through that, and the other half travelling internationally from the States to Australia, raising funds.
Phenomenal.
Why was the airport put there? It was put there originally from a religious point of view to bring pilgrims to the shrine.
Yeah.
And the Monsignor stated at the time that the next time a pope would come to Ireland and to the shrine, he would fly into Knock.
Yeah.
And we achieved that with Pope Francis. He flew into the airport in 2018. But the second reason was because of the economic deprivation around the west of Ireland. So the airport opened in 85, 86. Ryanair had their first flight, I believe, out of the airport to Dublin in 1987. And the rest is history in terms of the growth. The airport almost closed numerous times through the 90s. Because of, to be honest, you know, at the time, the view taken by government in the 80s was that there were enough airports on the island in terms of the old area infrastructure, Dublin, Cork and Shannon. There was this fourth airport built, you know, on an elevated hill in the west of Ireland, and really, to quote Jim Mitchell, on a foggy, boggy hill. We got through the 90s. Thankfully, the advent of low-cost travel in the early noughties was the revelation for the airport. And airlines like Ryanair, we had EasyJet, we had Be My Baby, Virgin Express, I remember at the time, all of the low-cost guys that were in that niche.
But crossing over, or can I just pull you back? I love the history. Can I just pull you back a little bit? Is not taken seriously today.
I believe it is.
I do.
I believe it is. Well, I tell you, I came into Knock in 2009 in the teeth of the financial crisis. Okay? And at the time, there was significant debt on the balance sheet. There was the airport was losing some money and was under severe pressure. There was a review conducted in 2011 by government of all regional airports and the PSO services that were supporting. If you remember at the time, there was PSO services to Kerry. Galway Airport was still operational.
For sure.
Knock had a PSO. Sligo had a PSO on Donegal. The PSOs were the lifeline of the regional airports. There was a review done in 2011, and the board and ourselves, we had to put a very strong case to government.
For sure.
To demonstrate the benefit the airport brings in a broader sense to the region in terms of we employ 200 people directly. There's about 3,000 jobs supported indirectly. There's 200 million in terms of tourism revenue into the region, and then all of the connectivity we provide on an international basis. So we managed to convince government that yes, we are excellent value for money in comparison to the other state airports. Our cost base, Dec, and without getting into absolute detail, is significantly lower than the other larger state airports. So in terms of value for money that we're providing, it's off the scale. But we had to convince, and we had to fight quite a, what would I say, a vigorous political campaign to convince the powers that be. Since then, we've seen positive growth. I believe we've reached a level where in 2018, Minister Varadkar at the time for transport stated in the National Development Plan that we were one of the 4 key airports now on the island in terms of future development and growth. We're part of the National Development Plan, so we're part of the national framework in terms of infrastructure. But that took a lot of work, to be honest.
For sure. And you did a lot of it. So the answer is yes, it's taken seriously now, and the numbers prove it with regard to not just tourism, but the amount of passengers. What's the annual?
Our annual passengers this year will be approximately 850,000 passengers. Use. And we have a catchment of about 1.3 million people. So when you consider our catchment versus our passenger numbers, I think it's quite significant.
I'm trying to make sure these kind of conversations are a bit more fun and not too serious. But we were chatting about it outside. How does the cap at Dublin, like, I didn't go to Harvard, but you could kind of work out maybe the cap at Dublin will help Knock, or is just the whole you mentioned about how Knock has a cap and other regional airports have a cap. So can you just explain that to people?
I think it's a small island. There's 6 million people on the island. So if the largest airport that has I think 85% of the traffic through it is capped in terms of growth. Obviously there has to be some benefit in the medium term, I'll state, to the other airports, because if airlines cannot fly into Dublin in the short to medium term, they may reallocate capacity to other airports or other routes. But if it's a situation where they realise in the medium term the issue then isn't going to be resolved, then if they want to fly to Ireland, they have to use other airports. So are we seeing an uplift from the cap at this current time? It's hard to actually put a finger on it. Our passenger numbers have grown 3 or 4%. We're seeing some additional frequencies being added in by our airlines that we suspect may be due to the cap. But against that, it would really take 2 or 3 years before we would see, we believe, airlines make clear business decisions to switch routes and so forth. And
the second part of that, Joe, there's a regional cap, which I didn't know.
In terms of a regional cap, I guess that's
my language.
It's down to a funding. It's down to the funding envelope that's available for regional airports. Airports like Ireland West, we receive our funding through what's called the Regional Airports Programme. That's a 5-year funding envelope that's approved by the EU and administered by the Department of Transport here. That current programme supports airports up to 1 million passengers for up to 75% of their capital requirements. And CapEx is the biggest spend element. We're spending 5 to 6 million alone each year on CapEx.
Wow.
Right. So that is, we did a run, for example, we've spent, I think in the last 5 years, close to 30 million on CapEx. We did a new runway overlay back in 2019 that cost 12 million.
Why doesn't the public know a bit more about this? Because it's a really important story.
Yeah, we have it out there. But you know the way the public work, and with due respect to them, they don't tend to look at the finer details until it stares them straight in the face. So, like, over the next 10 years alone, we've a CapEx plan of 64 million we have to meet. That is just maintaining the critical infrastructure of the runway, from fire, security, safety, air traffic control. As a regional, we manage all components. That's quite different to the state airports in terms of the IAA manage the, say, for example, the air traffic side of it.
For sure.
And there's an airport fire security service that can. But so regionals are quite very interesting case studies in terms of what we do.
And you know, I'm meant to know a little bit about the industry, and I'm really surprised at those CapEx figures. And
So the cap, basically, just to summarise, just answer your question, up to 1 million passengers. The funding is in a good position. Beyond 1 million, there's a significant drop in terms of the funding envelope available. The Minister, in a recent press release, has given a commitment to reviewing that cap, or call it a cap, but reviewing the funding envelope beyond 1 million passengers for airports like ourselves and Shannon, who are just under the 2 million at the moment, and Cork around, I'd say, close to the 3 million. Under EU guidelines, you can fund regionals up to about 3 million at a reasonable level if you wish.
So if I can put that into Dec Ryan English, that means you should be allowed to spend up to 3 million a year.
Yes. However, the envelope will drop from 70-80% down to 40-50% of available funding. So you have to match your revenue from your extra passengers to your CapEx and investment requirements.
If you go back to the comments you made about Leo's quotation and so on, surely we should just say we have 4 airports. Like, I'm going to get shot at Kerry and Waterford and Sligo and all that, but that's nothing new, right? We should just concentrate on the 4 jet ones.
I think, look, that'd be a government policy decision ultimately. We wouldn't be there without the jet runway, and
for sure.
And just harping back to the history, if there's one visionary that was in Knock, was the Monsignor that put the jet runway in place. It was the second or third longest runway in Ireland at the time, and people thought he was crazy. But without that jet runway, we wouldn't be there.
I'm kind of the school, it's there, can we just make it successful and move on and all that good stuff and so on.
I think there's a broader issue there, Dec, and it's been raised recently by commentators, especially around the cap. There is significant excess capacity available in to a degree where we are, but certainly down in Shannon and Cork, that the state should be using and better utilising. the investment that the state owns.
Yeah,
they own those airports.
Yeah,
so, and I've absolutely nothing against further growth in Dublin Airport. It's the capital. It's a different type of business model, and it needs it. But there needs to be a holistic view taken, and also from the broader perspective of regional imbalance. And I'd be a strong advocate of, we have a motorway crisscrossing the country, but north-south we have
Sorry. I think I know where you're going on this, and I'd like to bail in with you.
Okay.
We were talking about John Moran, the new mayor of Limerick, who's a fantastic guy. And my own view is that the rest of the towns in Ireland, or cities in Ireland, are going to go, oh shit, we missed something here. We should have our own mayor and so on. I think John will prove that with Shannon and Foynes and all that kind of stuff. You're of the strong view that there's two policies in Ireland, aren't you? That we take care of Dublin too much and we don't focus enough regionally.
I'd be of the view that I lived in the Netherlands back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I worked for a state organisation at the time, Enterprise Ireland, or the old Irish Trade Board.
Yeah.
And I know the demographics and the population and all that was quite different. But what it showed me was you need to put the infrastructure in place if you want to develop it economically. And when Ireland West, or NOC, was built back in the 80s, people thought it was a crazy idea. People thought nobody would use it. People said, we're close to 1 million passengers. We cover practically all of our operating costs.
Yeah.
Our only subventions is primarily around the capex, and the knock-on benefits is tremendous.
Yeah.
But if the naysayers were believed back in the 80s, that airport would never be there.
For sure.
In a similar,
but now it's not. Is it like what you're saying is, west of the Shannon effectively is still.
Well, in my view, and I was just looking at numbers last week, that the Northwest.
No, listen, I'm on your side, so we can bail into this.
The Northwest Regional Assembly published a report, and they called it an investment indicator, and they looked at all of the regions across Europe. There's 232 what they call NUTS 2 regions, which is basically a snapshot of investment from an EU perspective. We're ranking 219 in the West and Northwest. So in other words, and even within the island of Ireland.
And by the way, what should we be? Do you know?
We should be right up there in the top 10 or 20.
Okay.
In terms of, I'm talking specifically about the West and Northwest.
No, for sure.
Okay. So if you take the ERDF funding, the European Regional Development Funding, even within the West, we've received less than 10% of that for a quarter of the population, whereas east of the Shannon has received 75% for 50% of the population. Yeah. I'm just talking about the imbalance in terms of transportation. We have a motorway that was built from Limerick up to Tuam. It's a superb piece of infrastructure. We sought and lobbied for that motorway to continue up to Sligo and up to Derry. We're still asking. We've a rail line that was there almost 100 years ago up to Sligo. It was closed in 1972. The All Ireland Rail Review recently published has agreed to open it for freight only to Claremorris. We talk about sustainability, we talk about the environment. For 400 million, we'd reopen that line up to Sligo, and we'd regenerate the whole western seaboard. We'd regenerate towns, Charlestown, Corry, all these places. My view is we need to invest up front and we'll repopulate and regenerate. I know I maybe look at it. But that's as I look at the broader. The airport cannot grow and meet its particularly environmental targets.
It's like something like nearly 50% of the population is in one city. That's nuts.
It isn't. It is.
If you and I were starting off from scratch and we got somebody brainy like John Moran to come along, we wouldn't be doing that.
Now look at I recognise there are budget constraints and there's always but I'd be a strong advocate in terms of regional development on a broader sense.
Not many people would know what a person who runs an airport does every day. Would you touch upon that? Like, I think I know what you do, but I don't know enough. But because I think it's very interesting because, it must be very varied.
Yeah, I suppose that's the first point. From day to day, it is extremely varied. I'll have a set agenda in terms of meeting with my managers and so forth on a weekly basis or a couple of times a week. I run the airport. I'm also a main board member.
Where is your office?
My office is within the airport. I'm looking out on our main apron and I'm right in the staff office. We have a small complement of staff. We employ about 200 people. Almost 90% of those are what I'd call frontline.
For sure.
And we have a small staff group that run the airport. So my day can vary from anything from dealing with my stakeholder group in particular, my board, Department of Transport, we would have on average maybe 40 to 50 audits per year from various entities ranging from the Aviation Authority to the Department of Transport to the airlines. So we're audited quite heavily. Generally, I wouldn't be managing those audits, but I'd be maybe fronting and meeting the key players and stuff like that.
That sounds over the top. I'm not talking about knock. I'm just saying. So let's say all our airports in Ireland, like, are we auditing it up the wazoo? Are we?
Well, I
know you have to be careful on this, but I can say, like, it sounds.
It may sound over the top, but I think
I'm not talking about safety now. I'm just talking about other stuff.
But you have to look at it in terms of there are so many different aspects to the operating an airport. You have individual, elements being audited at different times.
Okay.
You know, so for example, we'll have a separate PRM audit for people with reduced mobility. So you have different audit groups. Then we've health and safety. We've got the hygiene. We've got the HSE. We've all different aspects of that.
I'll crack that note to another day with you, because
you asked me what I do. Like next week, I'm out of the country and I'm hopefully meeting an airline to secure a new route with my marketing and business development guy. The following week, I'm going to be, I think we're down in the Middle East again on the World Routes event, meeting airlines. So I do a lot of the front end business development. Sure. I do quite a bit of our shareholder group. We have 7 local authorities owning close to 20% of the airport. So there's shareholder meetings that take place on a quarterly basis. There are board meetings.
Is that cumbersome?
It is cumbersome, but we're a relatively small business, but we have quite a large shareholder group. We have a land bank around the airport of 600 acres that's designated as an SDZ. We're the only airport in Ireland with an SDZ designation. SDZ is Strategic Development Zone, right? So, for example, Adamstown's an SDZ here. There's a number of SDZs. Basically, you have approved advanced planning for an area. So we have a zone around the airport that's approved for MRO, that's approved for logistics warehouses, that's approved for aviation.
Aviation related
businesses primarily. So I'm involved in that as well in terms of trying to develop business. And for example, this week we had meetings with potential logistics providers, freight and MRO providers that hopefully will, So it's very varied. It's great. And opportunities like this to meet guys like yourself don't come up too often.
No, that requires a separate audit that you were stupid enough to come to meet me. But anyway, what would you regard as your kind of major win as the boss of the airport?
Look, I would have to say, when I joined the airport, we were, going through quite a number of challenges. Let's just say there was the balance sheet wasn't the healthiest, and the P&L was struggling. So bringing stability to the business over the last number of years. Bringing credibility to the airport on a national platform, and hopefully, our growth over, we've gone from about 500,000 to 850,000 over 10 years passenger wise. So it's not remarkable growth, but it's steady growth. And the challenge has been and building, like we have 2 major airlines there, and building relationships with those airlines that we have a steady path for growth to sustainable services. We don't want to be in a situation where it's come day go day in terms of new routes starting. So there's quite a bit of investment and time spent on that side of it.
My translation of that is you've put the airport on a good footing, and it's more credible, and you're knocking out all the important things for the west of Ireland. That's my language.
I hope that's the case, and I hope people see it that way. Obviously, I would love to see a scenario where there's significant more investment going in and the airport is expanding. But airports, as you know well, they're a very costly piece of infrastructure to run, and to, like I mentioned the capex numbers to you. We're owned by a corporatized trust. We're not owned by the state. So we don't have the means to borrow, for example, at state interest rates and all that. We don't have that backing. So we have to operate a very tight ship. we don't have, for example, based units from Ryanair, and that's been deliberate, to be honest, from a commercial perspective. And I know Eddie may be listening to this, and we've had discussions over the time, but we operate pretty much a single shift operation during the winter, and we expand our opening hours during the day.
Can we translate that? I think the translation of that is, there is carriers like Ryanair who would think about putting a base up there.
Yes, they're on the record in that. And
and so Eddie's bitching that you're not doing it.
No, he's not bitching at all.
Well, Eddie bitches a lot. So no, I'm being funny here now, right? Yeah. But and I'm not trying to put you in a situation. But what you're saying is, and the way I interpret this is, to keep your cost level manageable, having necessarily airlines based there will just bring the cost.
Well, that equation has to work.
Yeah, for sure.
And our typical operating day during the winter could be 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
And our summer day could be 14 hours. Yeah. So it's kind of on the single shift. Yeah. So the numbers, once you go outside that, need to work.
I got it.
So you need to get the extra passenger and revenue to compensate for the additional costs and infrastructure required to support that. And
any local gossip, is there? Has Hal Berry arrived there? I'm maybe putting my own wishes, but you must see some that you might be allowed to tell us. I don't know, J-Lo has been through there with her new boyfriend or something like that. Is there a story that you can say that maybe Joe Public doesn't know about? Or
I'm afraid to disappoint you. I can tell you we've had Joe Biden twice.
Yeah. Well,
we've had the Pope once.
I thought you had him twice. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah.
We've had the Pope once. I've had Bono, very nice guy.
Good. Another Pope.
We've had various politicians.
But can we just go through this? Forget Bono for a minute, even though I love him. So when Biden arrives in, does kind of the world take over, or do you guys? Will you get involved? I know that sounds stupid, but you hear all these stories about CIA, take over the place and all this kind of stuff. So Biden arrives in. Sorry, but it's probably planned. What, a month out?
It was planned. No, I tell you, in terms of Biden, we were fortunate. He came across as vice president in 2016. First of all, the planning for that was 4 months lead in. Yeah. When he came this time, we had only 2 weeks, because what happened was it was. Do you remember his itinerary was very uncertain. Yeah. And we only got 2 weeks. Now, we had all the pre-planning done. Yeah. We knew all the White House guys. We knew helicopter. We knew all the the term. We knew Air Force One guys. Yeah. We knew from the previous visit, and some of the same guys were there. Yeah. But effectively, you are, to a degree, I won't say taken over, but you're swamped by probably 100 and 150 US colleagues, and likewise on the Irish side.
And the most important part is, what did you charge them?
No, I tell you the challenge was.
I didn't say challenge. I said, what did you charge them?
Oh no, I know. No, but I'll tell
challenge. I want to know how much.
I'll tell you the challenge.
If you tell me it's free,
this
podcast is going to finish very quickly.
We did well on that one.
Okay, good.
No, but I just say that the challenge was there were so many parties on the American side and the Irish side involved in it. A lot of our role was to actually ensure that the information was being shared between them. Because we spent quite a bit of time initially having meetings with separate a siloed approach, and now that's no criticism of them, but it was quite. Once we got them all in the one room, it worked far more smoothly. But look at it; it was the greatest opportunity to put the airport on the map worldwide.
You're not telling me what was the invoice?
Let's say we're up in 6 figures anyway.
Whoa!
Good man. But that was landing fees for.
Jesus, don't justify it.
We must. The number of C-17s we had in with equipment and all that, and the support.
And did they take up some fuel?
They took a lot of fuel.
Good one. Jesus, that's made my day. Yeah. If you were going to model, and I'm not just thinking Knock now, I'm wearing my paddy hat, my Irish hat. Is there an airport that you like where you say, is there an airport? I'm not going to name them. Is there an airport where you think Knock could get to?
If there's an airport I'd like Knock to have the infrastructure of, I've been in a couple in the last year. Dubrovnik's new airport down there.
Oh, really?
I love the layout. I was down in Asturias, down in terms of an airport that can handle up to 3 million passengers. I can, and in a similar elevation as ourselves, because we're elevated at 700 feet, so we've got certain challenges in terms of weather and topography and all of that.
So Dubrovnik's a good one.
Dubrovnik was fantastic.
So before I ask the tricky question, is the PAX capacity around that?
The PAX, well, look at they have the stand capacity, and our future plan is to expand. We operate currently on 3 live stands. Our plan is to expand the number of stands.
Sorry, let's just in case, stands, as we know, is where the
aircraft park up.
Parking places.
And in terms of busy summer peak, we handle over 100,000 passengers a month, which translates into a significant number of movements per stand, which if you compare us to the likes of Heathrow, we're actually operating the same number of movements as Heathrow would, albeit for a few stands. So your stand capacity dictates the volume you can put through, but also your terminal capacity. So both, we'd have to expand both, Dec, if we are to grow further.
Okay. I'm loving this conversation, by the way, and it's not just because I love Mayo and Lewisburg and all that kind of stuff, but I'll mention them anyway. One of the questions I like to ask is, if you had a chance to have dinner and a beer with somebody in the industry, is there anybody...
Well, I tell you, I've
obviously not Eddie Wilson.
No, I've 2 people...
No, sorry, I'm joking here.
I've 2 people in mind. And the one I'd probably go for would be Richard Branson.
Okay.
You know, the guy fascinates me in having read about him. He had a...
You think he's for real?
Well, he's amazing. Reading his he had a tough childhood, and then he went through so many different businesses.
I'm not saying he's not he's certainly a PR genius.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be regarded.
Business-wise, probably.
I'm going to get myself shot again. In aviation, he wouldn't be regarded.
But to manage to maintain...
he's never made money in aviation.
But to be able to manage an airline on the transatlantic services, that's still apparently doing quite well. And I've flown Virgin a number of times, and they have good product. So just
by the way, he'd be loads of crack as well.
I'd imagine so.
I'd
imagine so. You know, I was going to say Elon Musk, but I'm not sure.
I just read his book. Have you read the new book?
No.
Try it, and so I'm really going to get myself shot here. Read the book, and we'll have a chat afterwards. But if I was in charge of Mr. Musk, I'd lock him in a room and just ask him for his ideas. But he's a genius, that's for sure. But and at some stage he might go into aviation. It wouldn't be a
the whole SpaceX program is fascinating.
And the ability to reuse the rockets. NASA would never have thought of that in a million years. But Joe, listen, I really enjoyed that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
You've been listening to Aer Dogs, brought to you by Irlandia Aviation and in conjunction with the Aer Dogs book by Tom Lyons. If you enjoyed listening to this interview, please subscribe or leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts.